and we already have a bunch of people who've joined us. So why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Beyond the Bin webinar. Topic is campus waste in the time of COVID. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Kristen Desmond, Senior Business Manager for Higher Education Healthcare at Casella. And I just want to thank our panelists, our customers and peers for joining us today to discuss these really critical topics. Given all the challenges our customers and peers are facing on campus this year, but having to adapt to meet new health and safety protocols for COVID just seemed like the right time to tackle this topic together and discuss the challenges and all of the things that are going well on campus. So we'd love to hear from the audience as well. After each segment, we're going to do a Q&A session. So on the right, you should be able to see a little box where you can put your question in if you want to do that. After each segment, we will pose those to the speakers. Sarah?
Okay. I'm just going to go over a few quick helpful tips to help you guys have a better experience on the webinar. The first is that in the top right-hand corner where you see on this yellow arrow, there's this little button. If you click on that, you can actually switch to speaker mode, which will just show you the person who's speaking along with the slides that are being talked about. And then down at the bottom, this is where Kristen was talking about the Q&A button. Right here it just says chat, but you will also have one that says Q&A to submit any questions that you have during the event.
Excellent, thanks, Sarah. So on campuses this fall, we've seen firsthand and heard from our customers that COVID feels like a waste disaster. In our first segment, the speakers will be discussing the effects COVID has had on their waste reduction programs and how they're working to adapt and position themselves to succeed in the future. How do we return to reusables, remove PPE, and continue our programs to reduce waste on campus? Our first speaker is Warren Biggins. Warren is Manager of Sustainability and Natural Resources at Phillips Exeter Academy in Exeter, New Hampshire. Prior to arriving at Phillips Exeter, he was the Sustainability Manager at Pitzer College in Claremont, California. Our second speaker is Allison Guerette. Allison is the Campus Coordinator at Phillips Academy Andover in Andover, Massachusetts. She works with the faculty, staff, and students to implement the Climate Action Plan goals and educate about climate change, making campus infrastructure more sustainable, and producing and using renewable energy. She has previously worked with state governments on climate and energy policy at the Northeast Clean Air Association. Allison and Warren, welcome and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you for the introduction, Kristen, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here to talk waste recycling and composting on campus during the time of COVID with everyone. What a time to be alive. So to begin, let me provide some background on Phillips Exeter. So PEA has an enrollment of between 1,050 and 1,100 students. And for the most part, classes are still being taught remotely, though there are a limited number of in-person classes that are happening. Under normal circumstances, our dining staff operate 2 dining halls where they compost both pre and post-consumer food waste, which is then sent to an anaerobic digester facility in Maine. In response to the ongoing pandemic, dining looks much different this term. Now the dining halls serve to-go meals only, and we've set up 4 tents under which our students can eat their meals. We also have food trucks coming to campus pretty regularly, and as the weather has started to get colder, we've recently opened some large spaces for indoor dining. All of those locations, both outdoor and indoor, have waste, recycling, and compost toters, as well as signage which details what can and cannot be put into each toter. which of course is extremely important as our meal service employs all three types of materials. Now, our dining staff did purchase compostable to-go containers and plates, but we also purchased plastic utensils and single-serving condiments and snacks. Many of the beverage options that are served in recyclable bottles and cans. And because a significant portion of the compost is made up of compostable containers, and the anaerobic digester facility that we work with doesn't like them as a feedstock, we decided to work with a local company that utilizes windrow composting. Slide, please. Thank you. One back, please. Thanks. For those of you whose programs look similar, you'll recognize what a challenge this variety of materials can pose to the proper disposal of these items. I've certainly spent a few meal periods helping students sort their waste into the appropriate bins. We definitely have seen some contamination of our waste streams. I had hoped that I would be able to partner with our environmental student groups to staff the tents and help have students help students have some input as to what goes where and help get the waste sorted appropriately. But unfortunately, I didn't get a lot of volunteers. I guess some students don't like to sort through their trash as much as I do. I can understand that. I will say I was happy to have received a proposal from a student over the summer, no less, who had anticipated the use of disposable utensils and wanted to do something about it. What she proposed was buying reusable utensils that we could hand out to all our students. And after some research, we ultimately decided to purchase a reusable spork that we've provided to all our students. And I've been encouraged to see a lot of these sporks out on campus. Next slide, please. So now that we've had nearly a full term of experience during the pandemic, I've identified a few areas that I'd like to see improvement on for when students return to campus. Right now, they are going to be heading home the week of Thanksgiving, and if all goes according to plan, we hope to have them return in mid-January. So the first is to expand composting to dormitories for the next term. Currently, we are piloting a composting program at 2 dorms, but to be honest, it's going to be a challenge to roll that out to the entire campus. All of the dorms are different in terms of population and configuration, and they're really going to require custom solutions for each. The second area is to advocate for reusable containers instead of compostable containers. In addition to the environmental benefits that I think we're all aware of, I do think that there is a strong business case that can be made here as well, and especially when you figure in the added costs due to an increase in volume of waste, recycling, and compost. Finally, I'd love to have more student involvement. I am currently in the process of hiring 4 student workers, but I'd love to have more students involved in helping their peers sort their waste correctly. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on prior to next term. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Allison at Phillips Andover. Thanks, folks.
Hi, everyone. Hi. Thank you, Warren. It's great that he and I are presenting on the same panel, because normally we are arch rivals. Our schools are arch rivals. So I work at Phillips Academy in Andover, Massachusetts. I'm the sustainability coordinator. So I spend about 50% of my time with our Office of Physical Plant and 50% of my time working with faculty and students. So we have a very similar construct to Phillips Academy in Exeter. We have about 1,150 students. 3/4 of them are boarding. 1/4 of them are local students who attend during the day. And we brought back almost all of our students in 2 different cohorts, and the students were required to quarantine in their dorms for 2 weeks upon arrival to school. So that meant we had to figure out a way to feed them in their dormitories right from the get-go when they got to campus. So we spent the summer meeting as a campus dining team. We had our allergist and our dining director, our custodial director, and myself representing sustainability, all coming together to work on this issue, which was great because that's not always the case. Sometimes sustainability is thought of kind of after the fact. So this allowed us to kind of be prepping all along. We didn't start out with reusable containers, as Warren mentioned. We have been pushing for them all along. We thought that they would be, we thought that it would be nicer for students and faculty and staff to eat from a reusable container rather than a disposable one. But the biggest sticking point for that at first was that our medical director was concerned that we wouldn't be able to get them clean enough, and that even if we were, that optically in the time of COVID, people would be nervous to be eating out of reusable containers. So we started off ordering compostable containers and trying very hard to figure out how we get composting in all, well, we have 40 dorms, we have about 30 of them open at the moment. And then also have composting out in our open tents that wasn't going to get raided by animals and that sort of thing. So we had some problems right off the bat when we brought back new faculty first a few weeks before campus opened, and we started using the compostable containers. And what we found on our campus was that by the time people received the food, the container was very mushy, and like Warren, our hauler didn't really even want those containers so much, at least the ones that are the more rigid PLA plastic like containers. So we also we had worked with Tiana at Casella and had kind of come up with a composting plan, but it required a whole lot of work by our custodial and dining staff. So we had to figure out a different way. So then we went to trying to get all recyclable containers and found that we were still kind of stuck because even purchasing recyclable containers was difficult right now. And so we ended up with a lot of containers with the black bases, which means that only half of the container is recyclable, and communicating that to our faculty, students, and staff who are eating in their dorm rooms or in their offices or in their homes was proving very difficult. So we ended up, a blessing in disguise, but we ended up with a huge mountain of trash in every dorm room and in our campus tents. And we started getting complaints right away that it was overwhelming, which allowed us to kind of rethink the reusable containers. And we went back to our dining director and said, hey, these are going through our commercial dishwasher. Here's how we maintain temp in the dishwasher. Here's the sanitation phase, and really described it in great detail and got the okay from her. And then we did a back of the envelope economic analysis and found that purchasing the reusable containers actually was far less expensive than purchasing the recyclable containers that we were able to get our hands on, even over the course of just one term. So that made the safety case, the economic case, and then we had to logistically figure out how we were going to do this. So we, at this point, students were coming out of the dorms from quarantine, and we still knew that they would be eating in their dorms. So we had to figure out a way to collect from all the dormitories and from campus tents where students were eating, and from some other kind of sticking points like our main administrative buildings and our dining hall where people were coming to pick up their food. We had to come up with these collection points. So I'm not really talking to this slide, but you'll see that we have the green containers with our meals laid out in them. We provided these bright green bags to students and faculty and staff so that when they picked up their meals, they would have something to carry it in and then return it in. We set up these white boxes with signage about sealing your containers well with any remaining food in them so that it could be composted, and we disperse them. They're not all just sitting right outside this building here. We disperse them into dorms around campus. We put these green hampers that you see in the bottom center picture into campus tents and started collecting bins from there. And we kind of joke around that our campus has been slimed because there's just green containers seemingly everywhere, but it's all working out, and they're getting back to us for us to wash them in our commercial dishwashers, and before which any food that's remaining in them gets composted. So that's just kind of a deep look into how we were able to achieve reusables. I will say it's helped a lot because we had made signage to hang above all campus recycling, trash, and composting bins. And so for those first 2 weeks when we had recyclables, we were just noticing that there was really no difference between the bins. People were, even though we had item by item signage about what belonged in which bin, we were still getting a ton of contamination. So this solution has allowed us to at least clean up our eating operation, if not the remaining parts of campus during COVID, where we have more waste than normal.
Awesome. Thank you, Allison, and thanks, Warren. That was really great. We do have some questions coming in, so I just encourage anybody who has a question, put it in the Q&A, and I'll ask Allison and Warren for you. So first question, Allison, for you. Who runs the dining services and who's responsible for washing containers?
So we have Aramark as our dining service provider, and Aramark staff were already deployed to deliver meals to dorms and also restock. We have pantry in each dorm now, which we've never had before, for breakfast items and for snacks throughout the day. Because we were asking students not to get a lot of packages delivered to campus and not to order food in. So we're stocking them with food on a daily basis. So those folks go around to each dorm as they're stocking the pantry. They collect the bins, they collect the greenware, as we call it, and then bring it back to our dining hall where it's emptied and washed by our dining staff. So it's not done by the diner. It's done by staff.
That's probably for the best. They would.
That really was. I mean, that really was the sticking point. Was really walking our medical director through the process, because obviously we spent our whole spring sanitizing our groceries, so we had to really convince her that this would be okay.
That's awesome. Sounds very successful. That's great. So Warren, I've got a question for you. What stakeholders on your campus have you had to engage to work on your plan? It sounds like you started with one plan and now you're going to reusable ware. Who do you have to work with to get the plan approved?
So we're not necessarily moving towards reusables. When this was all happening and we were making plans for trying to open the campus to students in the summer, I actually was unfortunately not involved in the decision to go to compostables and kind of just a variety of different materials. So now that we have all of this experience and we've seen kind of the increase in the volume of trash and recycling and obviously composting that has occurred on campus, I'm just really trying to encourage our dining staff to move towards reusables. Now, there are, it's not totally an easy process for dining to convert to, primarily because they're down staff. They are absolutely down a number of staff, and to have all of a sudden add all of these additional dishwashing responsibilities onto them, I think is going to be challenging. like I said, I do think there's strong environmental and financial case to make to switch towards reusables. But right now, I'm engaging our dining staff and our dining director in this discussion, as well as my colleagues. So I work in the facilities office, and my office is next door to our environmental compliance manager, who also manages our waste and recycling accounts, and then our grounds manager, whose crew are actually the ones that go around and pick up the trash and the recycling. So basically, the stakeholders that I'm engaging are the people that are responsible for the kind of the day-to-day operation of dining and then waste and recycling removal. So it's a large stakeholder group, and I'm eager to see what we're able to accomplish together before the next term.
Surprisingly, this might actually be a great exercise for some schools, right? Like, you've got to come together and figure things out pretty quickly, which that's not very typical for a campus, right? It usually takes a year to make a decision. So that might be one of the benefits of all of this, that you've got to quickly come together and figure things out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Allison, I've got another question for you. It's a two-part. One, what company are you purchasing the reusable material from? And two, are you seeing that you're having a lot of them go missing?
Yeah, so we ended up using OZ, I believe they pronounce it, which the reason we went with them was because they have a three-part container that, or three-compartment container that fit into the delivery caddies that we had purchased to keep food warm, to bring to dorms. So we worked within that restraint. They also have multiple sizes and shapes, and so we got the three-compartment containers and some smaller ones for sides, so that the dining staff could choose on a daily basis what fit into what container best. So OZ actually has these machines where schools can have people checking out and checking in the containers, which helps with managing the containers going missing. We did not go that route, although one way that we sold this was, we've been talking about it in the past, and when we sold the program was like, we will own these containers, and in future years, when we hopefully get back to dining in person, the containers could be used by students who come to the dining hall and want to take food to go. So in terms of preventing loss of the containers, our strategy, and I won't say that it's the best strategy because it makes a lot of work, but our strategy was just to make returning the containers really easy. And our guess is that any containers that we have had go missing are in faculty homes right now, maybe being used for school lunches and that sort of thing. But students are definitely, like, in particular, because of these green bags, which, like, if you're eating in your dorm or in a, somewhere else, you put the container in the green bag and then you take the green bag back to pick up your next meal, and you remember to return it then. So it's kind of an honor system. But I can see it being a problem in not in a high school setting, in more of a college or university setting.
We do love our color coding, don't we? It works for communication.
It really, the "you've been slimed" thing has been really funny.
That's great. That's awesome. Thank you. Let's see, Warren, I've got another one here for you. When finding a new outlet for compost, is all of your material going there, or just the compostable containers?
So we kept the food waste that was going to the anaerobic digester program the same, right? So all of the back of house, the pre-consumer food waste that is generated in our two dining halls is continuing to go to the anaerobic digester. But all of the post-consumer food waste, all of the clamshells, all of the plates that are utilized during the outdoor dining are going to the local company that does the windrow composting. So I guess we work with two composters now.
Okay. Looks like I've got another couple container questions, Allison. You have a website link you could post to where you purchased your containers. If you can get that to me, I'm going to be sending things out at the end of this anyway, and I can make sure I distribute that.
Yeah.
That works. Okay, perfect. And the last question I have is, the greenware containers compostable or recyclable if they become cracked or get to the end of their life?
That is a great question. We had started out thinking we were going with a company that preserveware actually that uses makes the containers from recycled materials and also allows for them to be recycled at the end of use. If you give me 2 seconds, I can run and grab one of these and see if what Recycle Simple has. Hold on 1 sec.
Sure. Just looking at the picture, they are very green.
It looks like they have PP and 5. So you tell me, Kristen.
Well, what I was going to say is, before you mentioned you guys were going to keep them and use them on the campus, I was going to say we already need to talk about what we're going to do with those, because there's definitely some opportunities if they're intact, right? There's food donation organizations that they could definitely go to and others. But if you end up with a bunch of containers that you need to get rid of, that's something we would manage as a single commodity. So I guess the answer is yes, we can help you with that. We'll figure it out.
Thank you. And actually, that brings up another point about them. One thing to consider, and it's a downside to the reusable containers. We had some partners that we were starting to work with to donate meals that were not picked up from the dining hall. And because the meals are now in reusable containers, it makes that process a little more difficult.
Yeah, that makes sense. Awesome. Okay, well, that was really great. Thanks to both of you. Seriously, that was really, really interesting. And it's so amazing to see how you've been able to adapt so quickly I can't even imagine when you started trying to figure this out. Was it early July, early August, trying to put a plan in place? It's incredible what you've been able to do.
We were at least able to pilot in the spring with some faculty. So we kind of knew what the sticking points were going to be at that point. And then we did start back in June, although again, like the plan had to change once students were back on campus and we saw how much waste was being generated.
Thanks for having us, Kristen, and thank you for all the support. Appreciate it.
Absolutely. Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. So just to finish up this segment, our little group who manages institutions, we've been thinking a lot about how our campus is going to go back to normal. How are they going to adapt? Because obviously what we're seeing is all of these different departments I have listed here: central procurement, dining, facilities management, ground services, custodial services, residential life. All of these departments have been procuring the single-use dining ware and excessive amounts of PPE and cleaning materials. And so one thing we've been thinking about is just encouraging our customers and campuses to start working on a recovery plan now. So I think the importance there is to ensure that campuses don't continue to keep buying single-use materials when they don't, once COVID is done and it's safe, we want them to be able to switch back to their programs that they had in place. And I think the other piece to that is ensuring that you have that campus communication plan in place too. So educating the campus so that they know what you're doing to try and get back to those reusable materials and what you're trying to do to get back to any recycling or compost programs that have maybe not been going so well this year. And just really to communicate that to the campus community so they know what your plan is to get back to normal when you can. But it looks like we're going to move on to the next segment. So that's actually a great segue. The segment is communication in the face of uncertainty. And as we've all seen, so COVID has moved much of the waste generation on campus from the back of the house to the front of the house, resulting in many universities dealing with lots of student complaints and feedback about the vast amount of food waste and the vast amount of waste that they're seeing. So in this segment, our speakers are going to discuss what can be done to be proactive in communication and ensure that message is heard. Our first speaker is Sophie Rogers. Sophie joined the Office of Sustainability in the summer of 2020, having graduated from Bentley with a Bachelor of Science in Marketing and Liberal Studies in Earth, Environment, and Global Sustainability. Given her experience as a student sustainability leader and valued team member, she completed the team by becoming the office's manager of sustainability. Our second speaker is Jeff Weld, Director of Community Engagement for Casella Waste Systems, where he oversees all engagement and marketing functions for the regional solid waste, recycling, and resource management services. Prior to joining Casella, Jeff spent the first part of his career at Castleton University, guiding the strategic branding and communication efforts as Dean of Advancement. So welcome, Jeff and Sophie. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kristen.
Absolutely.
All right. Hello, everyone. So thank you, Kristen. Thank you, Casella, for setting this up and having me come speak. So as Kristen mentioned, my name is Sophie Rogers. I am the Manager of Sustainability at Bentley University. And Bentley University is a private business school that has about 5,000 students. That's 4,000 undergrad and about 1,000 grad. So just to give a little background on what happened with COVID-19 is that we invited all of our undergraduate students to come back to campus, and about 60% of them did. So we have about 2,400 students on campus currently. So to begin, I just want to give a little background on the Office of Sustainability at Bentley. And so the Office of Sustainability at Bentley is comprised of 3 women, and that is Amanda King, who's the Chief of Staff to the President, as well as the Executive Director of Sustainability, Natalie Hayes, who is the Associate Director of Sustainability, and myself. Because we are such a small office, we really rely on our 6 student interns. And so each of these interns comprise different aspects of our office, and this makes up our Student Sustainability Leadership Program. So these are paid internships, and we have 6 students, 2 of them which makes up our events team, 2 of them which makes up our PR team, and 2 of which really help support the office's just daily operations and goals. Which brings me into Bentley University has these big goals and achievements that are set in place that really kind of rides what we do in terms of sustainability and really helps us focus in our programs. And today specifically, I'll be talking about waste. And so I just wanted to highlight our waste diversion goal of 60% avoided from landfills for 2020. And as you can see, we are at that about 40% mark that we are able to divert about 40% of our waste from landfills. So obviously some more work to be done. However, this is where we're at. Okay, so COVID-19 and waste, the solution. That obviously means there was an issue. When COVID-19 arose, the biggest issue for us was, what are we going to do? Because we know that there is going to be an increase in waste. And with this increase in waste was also rollbacks of some of our programs that we had already had in place. Because once COVID hit, the first thing we thought about at Bentley was how can we maintain safety? So in order to maintain safety, we unfortunately did have to roll back our program of reusable containers we had implemented in the dining halls, which was, a student could, for $5 at the beginning of the year, get a reusable container, and that way they could go to the dining hall and, get their food and bring it back to their dorms. We had to roll that back. We also had to roll back our food donation program. And instead, we had to increase the amount of single-use materials for our dining. So everything went to single use. That is whether you were going to the dining hall to eat in, or we implemented Grubhub on campus where you could order in the beginning and go pick up contactless your food. So with this all happening and dining being reimagined and wondering, what was campus going to look like in the fall semester, next thing we knew, here we were trying to implement a composting program in 2 weeks. So everything kind of finalized, and we got, notified that they are going to be procuring all compostable materials for our to-go wear. And now we were left with this, okay, what are we going to do with that? And so in 2 weeks' time, we launched a campus-wide post-consumer compost program. We were lucky in the fact that we had already been doing back-of-house composting, so we kind of knew the operations. We had all of that on campus. However, this was a new beast for us, which was now bringing in the student side and the student communication. So we really focused first on operations and then on education. And this really came from this idea that we were so behind in getting to be known, and really how this works is that we involved our waste minimization task force, which normally meets monthly. Towards the end of August, it was meeting weekly, and our waste minimization task force is built from, dining staff, residential staff, Casella sits on it, and it also has our grounds and facilities. So like I said, I'll start with challenge 1. And challenge 1 was operations. So operationally, how were we going to implement post-consumer composting? And this meant, what did dining halls look like? Where were students going to be eating? Where can we capture as much waste as we can with the bandwidth that we have? And so we started by implementing composting just where we thought students would be dining besides their dorms. So this was, we had outdoor tents, and we also did allowing for students to eat in the dining halls. So we implemented having compost bins in the dining halls as well as outside at our dining tents. Now this posed a challenge for us because inside the dining halls, that is managed by our dining provider, Sodexo, and that has always been managed by them. And now that we are shifting and we had these outdoor tents, those were managed by facilities management. So there was this two-prong approach where we had to teach 2 different constituents on campus how composting was going to work and what it was going to look like depending where you were. So that was our first challenge, was getting both, onboarding from both Sodexo and facilities management, and really working with them while they already were so, thinned out because of the ramp up of operations and maintenance on campus. So that was challenge number 1. And challenge number 2 was communication, is still communication and education. Because when you're implementing a new program, you're always going to have pushback, whether that's through the people that are going to be implementing it or the people that are at the end that have to do their part, which is, sorting my waste correctly, sorting their waste correctly. So with education, where we really focused on, once we got the operations on board, I'm going to really lump in the education into that aspect too, for those who are actually operating and are operating our post-consumer composting program, and really focus in on this education aspect for our students. And that is, they came back to campus, everything's changed, and we're hoping to kind of piggyback on the fact that all of these students are going to be learning new ways of doing things and understanding what the new normal is at Bentley, and try to really harness that learning and to try to put ourselves in that as well, which is where we kind of were able to begin educating on composting. So we did this in multiple different ways. So if we go to the next slide, I can show a couple images of what we did. The biggest part is that this says, but it says it's compostable. Now, not only are they learning that there are 3 bins on campus, now they have to learn, okay, I just finished eating, what specifically can be composted? Because we work with Casella for our composting, and their facility accepts organic material and unlined paper products as well as paper straws. So that means that those are the 3 things that are allowed to go in our compost bin when there are so many other things on campus that, has to be thrown away when you're done dining. So to give an example, our to-go containers, the bottom of the container is compostable. The top of it is not compostable. Even if the plastic on top says it's, compostable plastic, we cannot compost that. So that has to end up going in the trash. So this really posed a big challenge, which was that how are we going to get students to really understand different areas in which parts of their meal that they can compost, trash, or recycle. This also posed the challenge because, like I said, most people, you're going to pull up if you want to figure out where to, dispose of your waste, you're going to look at your to-go-ware, and you're going to say, okay, I see the recycling symbol. Okay, I see it's compost. Okay, this doesn't have anything. I'm going to throw this in the trash. So we really tried to make it as simple as possible, and that's where this waste disposal guide came in. And so we partnered with marketing at Bentley, and they helped us create this really simple, easy to read waste disposal guide. And we got this printed in the biggest of signs that we could. And we put them out at the tents, we put them in dining halls, and they were plastered all over our social media, and really just trying to get students when they're at the bin itself to understand if they need a quick reminder. However, when it comes to waste and it comes to disposing, we've learned that the best way to get students to do it right is if they know where everything goes before they get to the bin. Because if you think about when you're eating, the last thing you think about when you're going is throwing things out. And that's normally when you're in a rush. Say you're a student, you're eating lunch, you have to run to class. You want it to be simple when you get there. So that's when we really started trying to get students before they got to the bins. And that's where this what do you know about composting came out. And this is what we posted all over our social media. And it is, we posted it all over our social media. Throughout this entire process, we really realized that, we learned a lot. And I really think that the main takeaway from what we've learned is, if you go to the next slide, is that you have to frame your first semester launch as a learning period. And this is really where we were able to get most of campus and our faculty, students, and staff on board. So from an operational standpoint, everybody was really boggled down that it wasn't perfect at first. And so once we framed it as your first semester is your learning period, that's when we were able to get more people on board. And also from an office, understanding that, when we're trying to communicate, we have to understand that there's a learning curve, and it's going to take some time. And if we just look at this as a launch, and every time something doesn't go right, kind of note it and say, what can I learn from that? Moving forward, we'll be able to build upon it. Thank you. All right, I am going to pass it off to Jeff.
Thanks, Sophie, and thanks, Kristen, and the whole team for the invitation today. Sophie nailed a lot of the points that I brought up, so I'm sure things are going off without a hitch at Bentley for sure, right? But really, I think that first and foremost, I want to just talk a little bit. Kristen gave some background on me, but I wanted to talk a little bit more about my time on a college campus and how it sort of shaped a lot of my thoughts and goals around how we communicate, how we deliver messaging to each other in times of crisis or not. So I grew up in Vermont. I'm a native Vermonter. My father was a laborer, worked in the facilities, buildings and grounds department for a number of years at Dartmouth College. So I spent a lot of time at Dartmouth, just through him and different events and things like that. And, fell in love with college campuses at a very young age. Was the first person in my immediate family to go on to college and went to Castleton University as a student, and then just stayed on after graduation and worked in athletics for a number of years. My whole time that I was attending the university, I went back home and worked at Dartmouth mowing lawns and getting to know the guys in the facilities and you know, really had just a passion for what was happening on campuses and education from a number of different avenues. I was fortunate enough to spend about 15 years at Castleton in various roles, and eventually, you know, was in a position to really drive a lot of the strategic communications and fundraising and all that as the dean of advancement. But I think ultimately, and in looking at the folks that I've seen as participants on this and seeing some of the names and knowing some of the backgrounds a little bit, you know, my biggest takeaways and the things that I learned the most always came from stepping outside of my own bubble and stepping into areas where I was learning from others on that campus. You know, what are the challenges that facilities is facing? What are the opportunities that we have with residents' life to help message things from a communication standpoint? And I really think that stems from, you know, an early time in my background and understanding that there are so many different audiences. And I know I'm preaching to the choir with a lot of you on the call today, but I think that operationally, one of the biggest reasons that we can fall down is that we don't approach communication strategically. We don't consider what the receiver might be seeing in their world on that day. So, you know, I'm not a big slides guy, but, you know, I saw all these nice PowerPoints everybody else put together, and I said, you know, shame me into it. I'm going to put together a couple of slides, and hopefully you guys can take a little bit of away from the diagram that I think helped shape our communication strategy at Casella, and certainly was built through trials and tribulations on a college campus for sure. So the first piece of this is, you know, we have this expectation, right? And people at Casella have heard me say this a million times, and certainly the people at Castleton would get sick of hearing me say it. I was really parroting a mentor and a colleague of mine, but the whole goal here is to tell your story, to tell it often, and to tell it well. I mean, to me, that's the ultimate key to successful communication. And we have this feeling that communication and telling our story is a linear experience, that we're going to start as the source and we're going to deliver that message, and the receiver's going to catch it and they're going to do what we want them to do. But in reality, that's not the case, right? I mean, the receiver is going to receive it. Next, Sarah. And they're going to have some sort of feedback from it. And in COVID, it's really difficult because we're all talking to these little boxes, right? We never, we don't get in touch with each other anymore. We're not in person, so it's hard to read body language or, you know, are they distracted? Are they looking at another screen while I'm speaking? We just don't have that as much. So in a time like COVID, you know, we've got to be super in tune to what is the feedback and how are they adapting? What is the behavior change? Did my story land, right? And we want the loop to just be this simple, right? Okay, they got it. Let's send the message again. But it's just not that simple, right? So we got to add this green piece, right? Where we're not saying the same exact message in the same exact way. We have to adapt to what the receiver is thinking, and then, you know, ultimately become the receiver ourselves. So much of what happens in communication breakdowns, especially in a society that's, you know, dealing with everything that we're dealing with these days, is we don't pay attention to the environment around us. We don't think about what the receiver is going through. We don't speak. We don't listen to hear and understand. We listen to find the next point to speak. And when you have all of these pressures around you in the environment, right, that's when we have real communication breakdown. We don't consider what's happening out there. We don't consider the noise that's being created by that environment. And everything gets compressed down and then our operations suffer. And we ultimately think, well, we have an operational deficiency. But what I found, 9 times out of 10, especially on a college campus with so many varied constituencies and stakeholders, that we're not operationally deficient. Our communication is deficient, right? And that leads to those breakdowns. So one story that I always think back on when I had first entered into the role overseeing fundraising and development efforts at Castleton. We had a great corporate development guy who really worked hard to secure sponsorships and make sure that we were, generating that kind of revenue for the university to keep us operational. And he really worked hard on cultivating relationships and doing that, the right way. And there was an instance where we had a project going on campus. The facilities manager ended up using a vendor that came with a great price and he had a relationship with, and ultimately said no to a sponsor on campus that was a 5-figure donor to the university. And that sponsor, was, rightfully or not rightfully, depending on your ethos, upset that was the case. That, how could Castleton make this decision? We're a major donor. How could they not give us this business? And the reality was there was never a conversation that happened between the development office and the facilities office to say, look, here's a list of our donors. I don't expect you to give them work because they're donors, but what I expect is that we have a conversation if one of them is going to lose a critical piece of business, that you prepare me and I can go out and let them know as well. So we don't have these things where we fall down and potentially lose a donor. So that's just one instance where, you can think about all of these things where you're like, boy, it just makes so much sense to me as a sustainability director that we would do this. Why doesn't residence life get involved? Well, if we try to send this message to residence life and they're in the middle of move-in, right? Their environment is creating such pressure on them to be operationally focused that how could they possibly think about engaging in some sort of systematic change, right? So those are things that I think about a lot, especially in my role here. Is how can we bring people to the table together in formats like this and really talk through these things? And what I've found, COVID, I'm an optimist by nature, so sorry, I get a lot of positive rainbows out of this stuff, but crisis communications, and especially in a time like COVID, it's about finding the opportunities, because crisis is a magnifying glass. It's going to reveal the very best about who we are and the very worst about who we are. And if we look at the very worst of who we are and what we're doing, then we're going to get bogged down by that and feel like, oh, it's inescapable, we can't get through it. But if we look at it as an opportunity to improve, then that's where it really happens. And there was always this saying we had from a crisis management team at Castleton. There's only 3 stages of crisis management anywhere, but especially on a campus. And that's pre-crisis, mid-crisis, and post-crisis, right? If you're not in crisis, it's only a matter of time until you are in crisis. So use that pre-crisis time to plan on what's going to happen, and not just engage your emergency management team on, okay, operationally, what are we going to do? But engage all the stakeholders in like, okay, how are we going to get your message to the right people at the right time, using the right channels and avoiding all of this compression of noise? And then how are we going to listen, adapt, and give positive feedback to create the kind of change that we want to do? And I think about like the messaging that we've sent out as a company during COVID, right? And you know, we've consistently said certain things in every message that we've delivered, and then we've sort of tailored them based on the audience and tailored them in a way that made sense for that audience. And then listen, did it land? Are we seeing the right contamination rates in our recycling? Is it improving? Is it getting worse? What are we seeing? Is it more PPE? Do we need to create more signage? How do we message that? And I think that's one of the real benefits to being, you know, sort of mid-crisis, but also having a prolonged crisis, right, where we can evaluate what you're doing. You can, is this working? So my encouragement, and if there's one takeaway from a long-winded, rambling approach here, I think the idea here is that most campuses, most high schools, colleges, universities are going to have an emergency management team. They're going to have an emergency management plan. Does sustainability have a seat at that table? Does Res Life have a seat at that table? Are we just relying on the communications people to communicate our message? So I think really feeling like we all can work across the different departments and do a better job of, you know, listening and understanding what the challenges are in those departments specifically is a key to this. You know, one other anecdote, and I promised Kristen I'd meet my time and I wouldn't ramble on, so I don't know how I'm doing. But you know, one other anecdote from a college campus that sort of resonates with me and really stuck with me was Castleton, like many small colleges and universities in the Northeast, was you know, really struggling with budgets and funding, and you know, we were going through a period of time where we had to right size the university from a personnel standpoint, and you know, we had to lay off some people. I was part of the leadership team that was involved with, you know, how do you tell your friends and that they're going to lose their jobs and, you know, things are going to get better. And I think we did a pretty good job of that one-to-one directing what that messaging looked like. But one item that sticks out in my mind is I remember distinctly on the day that we had to let go 15 very, very talented people from the university, and a few of them from the facilities team. One of the members of another team on campus went to the facilities organization that day and complained about, you know, their lawn not being mowed out in front of their building. And, you know, no malice. It wasn't an angry or you know, how could you kind of thing. But it made very clear to me that we didn't do a good enough job of messaging to the entire community, you know, where the cuts were most likely going to affect, how to treat each other and get through it together. So I think that's part of it, right? That's part of understanding what people are going through individually throughout the campus and really being mindful of that when we're trying to message these things. How'd I do, Kristen? Did I make the time?
You did great. I didn't have to pull the hook out. Thanks to both of you guys, Sophie and Jeff. That was really helpful. You both had some really great takeaways for, I'm sure, everyone on the call. Sophie, you guys adapted so quickly. It's just incredible how fast you're able to put that plan in place. And it's what's exciting about it is it will have such positive effects on your programs in the future. And hopefully it's even helped with tying in Jeff's piece, you know, the communication on campus. You had to quickly come together to make those changes, and hopefully that will resonate in future programs and decisions that have to be made. And Jeff, I mean, the thing that stands out about what you just said to me, and there was a lot, but finding the opportunity right now is such a great time to be figuring out what's going well, what's not going well, and figuring out how to fix things, but also celebrating successes and trying to, trying to keep some of those great things that are happening right now and incorporate them into future programs. So thank you very much to both of you. I'd love to open it up to questions. We've got a few so far, but if everybody has some questions, if you want to send them to me in the Q&A, that would be great. The first question I have is for Sophie. How does your student program work, and what are their roles on campus? Also, where does funding for their positions come from?
All right. Okay. 3 questions. So I'll try to answer in line of how you asked. So what is our program? So we have a student sustainability leadership program, and this, like I said, is made up of 6 paid interns who come from Bentley's campus. So like I said, we are a business school, and it's part of our mission is to, our overall mission is to graduate sustainability-minded graduates as the Office of Sustainability. And so this program works that we bring each year 6 students together to form a team. And one of the questions I think hopefully I can answer it as I'm explaining it is, like I said, there's 6 students. 2 of them make up our PR team. So that is our content creator and our PR coordinator. So our content creator is all of those graphics I showed, the like, what do you know about composting? She does that. And she runs, all of any content we need made, she makes. Our PR coordinator really is the one that's running our social media channels and thinks about strategy. So she strategizes what is the messaging that we want to get across to the campus this semester. And specifically right now, we're focused on environmental racism. So she's trying to implement environmental racism messaging along with voter information and all of that. We have our 2 events coordinators that makes up our events team. So we run events on campus or now on Zoom and virtual platforms as part of what we do in the Office of Sustainability. And a lot of our events are actually coordinated by our students. So a couple weeks ago, we had an Instagram Live where myself and one of our interns spoke about environmental racism, and this was all coordinated by our students. And yeah. And then we have 2 other students, and one is the Office of Sustainability Assistant. And this role is really supporting our, management team, so myself and my 2 colleagues. And what they do is, what he does, the assistant, is really just supporting in the operations. And then our new role is our social justice coordinator. This is new as of this year. And so this was really in response to the racial justice movement that was happening this summer. And our response to it was to really look at ourselves as an office and, what can we do? And so she's really paving the way for institutionalizing this position. Funding for this comes in our budget. So we as an office have our own individual budget, and one of those budget lines each year is student wages. Oh, I think you're muted.
Of course I am. It's just super impressive what you guys are accomplishing and how you're able to engage with the students, especially this year. That's amazing.
Thank you.
Jeff, I've got a question for you. How do you think the best way to get feedback from students, one of our largest stakeholders throughout the year? So what's the best way to get feedback from the student body?
I think anybody on the call that directly interfaced with students or worked with students knows that it's probably the hardest thing to do is to engage a student in an area that they're not intrinsically just wanting to be motivated to engage, right? There has to be a way to dig through some of that apathy. One of the ways that we found to be successful in getting feedback across a number of different initiatives at Castleton, not just sustainability initiatives, but was to really first and foremost engage the student leaders. And that's not just necessarily who who is appointed or who your student government association is, right? But we all know that there are certain leaders on campus that have a stronger following than anybody in the communications office or anybody in the sustainability office. So I think getting them first and foremost to buy into a message, whether it's student athletes at Castleton, there was about a huge 30% of the student body there is a varsity athlete, right? So that's a huge group of students that you can tap into to help deliver a message, whether it's around social justice or sustainability, or hey, there's a new app that we need everybody to download. Let's get all the student athletes to download it first, and then have them tell their friends about it after they've interacted with it. So I think first and foremost, it's identifying who those student leaders are on campus, and then getting them to buy into what your message is. And then sort of a observational feedback is always the key with students. Anybody who's a parent, that how was school today? Good, right? I mean, you're not going to get the direct everything out of a one-on-one conversation with a student ever. It's never been my experience. And the ones you do probably don't really, speak for the entire group. So to me, it's all about, observing their behavior, understanding whether your communication efforts are landing with them and showcasing the desired change, and then adapting your message from there on out. If it's working, then, promote that it's working, thank them, be grateful, showcase that they're being successful, keep driving that good behavior. If it's not, again, punishing them, not a great way. I mean, I see a lot of college campuses, parking tickets and all this stuff, and they feel no pain from it. Their parents pay for it, and it's just gone, right? It's more about re-educating and getting them into a place where this is fun, this is exciting, this is important. And I think the best way to do that is to tap the student leaders. And it's not always the easiest thing, but it's the way to get their attention.
Makes sense, and it's an enormous challenge. I mean, look at how many groups there are on campus. It is so difficult. It's something we obviously all face all the time. So I've got one more question, and I will pose this to you guys. It's about reusable wear. And so, Sophie, I'm not sure if you guys have been considering it at all, but the question is, especially now when dining services and our auxiliary services are having to deal with a very challenging situation, how do you suggest starting the conversation about reusables without putting people on the defensive?
This is a great question. I can't speak from experience because we haven't, unfortunately, started the conversation just yet on what next semester in dining is going to look like. I think that's going to be a conversation happening in a few weeks once students, are home after Thanksgiving and onwards, and thinking about, what's happening next semester. I think the biggest thing is really understanding safety. I think at Bentley, safety is forefront. And so that's where this idea of, taking our reusable container program away was for safety and smooth operations of our dining. So I mean, Jeff, maybe you can explain, and I'm wondering if, even Allison might be able to explain better how she got to start the conversation without putting people on the defense. But if it was me and I was the one saying, I really want reusables back on campus, I think I would start with research showing that it's safe. And I think personally at Bentley, that's how it would allow us to move forward, is just proving its safety first, and then talking about how we can implement it into dining once again.
Yeah.
Hi, I was going to jump in and say that we did actually look for studies and shared studies with our medical director. She was really busy at the time, so I think she probably just looked at the headings of them and just saw that it's something that has been investigated. But yeah, that definitely was a concern. And then we were, I mean, it was a huge lift. We had nothing like this before we started, and so we were all like holding our breaths, like, is this going to work? So if you've had it if you've done reusables to some extent in the past, I think you're like one step ahead. So you can say logistically, yeah, this works. And yeah, we do have some different considerations because of COVID and where people are actually eating on campus, but.
Yeah, and I would just tack on to that what Sophie had said. You know, I'm a one-trick pony. Please don't tell my supervisor, but I know one thing. If you continue to tell your story and why it makes sense and listen for the feedback, eventually people come around and understand that it's the right thing to do. It's not always as quickly as we'd like it to be. I'm also a Guy Kawasaki disciple, and Guy Kawasaki was the chief evangelist for Apple computers back in the day. And he's all about enchanting people with his stories. And it's not about persuading them. It's about creating enough buy-in that it becomes a movement, and it's not you know, you're pulling somebody along because it's the right thing to do. It's getting them to agree that it's the right thing to do. And I think that's a huge thing that we miss a lot. We miss it every day of our lives when we try to encourage somebody to get on board with what we're thinking. We just want to beat them over the head with what we think, and we don't want to try to understand their point of view and why they might be defensive. We just know that they're being defensive. So that's my, you know, it's not easy, but it's about finding that common ground, telling the story, keep beating the drum, and trying to break through inertia where it exists.
A great point, and I'm sure all the speakers on here today have figured that out, right? That's the right approach to be able to get that buy-in. It's what works. Absolutely. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Jeff and Sophie. That was great. Really, really appreciate you sharing all this information today. Thank you. So we're on to our final segment. Our speakers will give you some great examples of innovative programs from our customers' campuses while facing challenges by COVID this fall, caused by COVID this fall. Our first speaker is Sarah Healy. Sarah joined Casella in 2018 as a strategic account manager for the greater Boston area. Prior to joining Casella, Sarah completed an MBA in sustainable innovation from the University of Vermont and served on the leadership team of the U.S. Composting Council Young Professionals. Up next is Tiana Biggins. Hailing from New Hampshire, Tiana joined the Casella team in the summer of 2019 as a strategic account manager. She serves as a primary point of contact for several campuses in Mass and New Hampshire, ensuring the needs and goal objectives of each campus are fulfilled. Tiana holds a BA in Media Studies from Emerson College and is in pursuit of a BS in Conservation and Sustainability from UNH Durham. And finally, Kelton Bogaski. Kelton graduated from UVM in 2017 with a BA in Finance and Marketing and has been with Casella for 2 years, managing our accounts in Northern Vermont. He works with our university and industrial customers to help them reach their strategic waste reduction goals and optimize their day-to-day service schedules. Welcome, guys.
Thanks, Kristen. So I'm going to be talking kind of quickly in a broad sense about how we've used data to adjust for a lot of the changes in waste generation we've seen throughout COVID. And first, I'm going to kind of talk through some of the trends. And I'm sure a lot of you have noticed this on campus, but a lot of the previous waste was generated in the back of the house. So it's generated from our dining halls and places like that. And what we saw was that so much of that waste has moved to the front of house, where it's being generated in the dorms and kind of all over campus. In addition to this, we also saw increased volumes, but reduced tonnage. And really tried to look at that and understand how it was impacting the overall waste generation on campus. So although this graph is pretty small on here, I'm just gonna give a little bit of an anecdote of what we saw based on some of the waste data from Bentley. And what we really saw here was that, especially, we saw a lot of the waste generation go from places like the Student Center and La Cava, where the primary dining halls are, to really being spread out across the various locations on campus. But with this, we also saw a dramatic reduction in a lot of the waste total over the course of the September. And what we did with this information is that we went back to campus and really looked at how much volume was being generated based on information from the drivers and stakeholders on campus, as well as the back-end waste information to understand what the schedule should really be and how we could right-size service to ultimately save Bentley money and improve the operations on campus so there aren't overflowing containers or over-service containers. The other thing I think is super important about analyzing this waste and data is really looking to drive towards zero waste. And in the True Zero Waste program, a lot of the evaluations that are done are looking at, is there any savings from various things that are happening, and how can those savings be applied to other projects that are happening on campus? And I think that this is something that is going to be worth doing and looking at some of these programs that have been implemented throughout COVID and over the past few years, is understanding how they've impacted our waste and how we can then redirect those funds to further impact our waste in the future. So the graphs that you see here are from our new dashboard that we're launching and in the process of continuing to launch. And hopefully you guys will all be seeing more of that soon. But it allows us to basically compare more easily year over year for different time periods to allow for understanding of what that waste generation looks like and what the spend looks like year over year. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tiana.
Thank you, Sarah. So my name is Tiana, and I wanted to highlight one of the green move-out programs that we had this year. Typically, we have several green move-out programs every year, but due to COVID, that was kind of put on pause. But one campus that, things just kind of fell into place at the right time, and our donation carrier was actually able to start receiving donations. So we got the Green Move Out program underway at Phillips Academy, Andover, and they persevered through the time of COVID and, not really knowing how students were going to participate in donating their materials as they were moving out. That was still a huge unknown. But in keeping with their sustainability mission, they really brought it through to fruition, and that I wanted to highlight. And with that, next up is Kelton.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for staying to the end here, and definitely excited to talk briefly about UVM's EcoWare program, which is similar to what Allison was highlighting with their OZ program. So an interesting thing, I work up in our northern Vermont market. An interesting problem we faced this year was July 1st of this year, the mandatory composting law went into effect. So no food waste is allowed to go into your trash. So a lot of these universities up in our market who have been composting for years through their dining halls are now looking, how do we capture that material that's at the residence halls and generated throughout the campus. But a little bit about UVM's EcoWare program, if you go next slide. So UVM has been doing the EcoWare program for about 4 to 5 years. It's just a different company that makes the material. So they've been doing it for years, except in the past, it's been an opt-in program. So not everybody on campus was was engaging with the program as really the more environmentally minded students. And you'd get a little cow tag and return it each time and get the reusable foodware when you go to the dining halls. So they make clamshell and soup containers. They really stuck to 2 containers. But what we looked at in the past is the biggest problem we faced was the loss of containers. So it was about $8,000 a year of leakage from the system of containers not being brought back by students. I know Allison has great return rates, which is awesome, and it's about how to get that on a college campus. So when COVID-19 hit this year, and everybody was thrown up in a pandemic, and everyone was thinking about where people were going to be eating their meals, UVM decided at the provost level to purchase 10,000 units of this EcoWare and really commit to reusable foodware instead of the compostable foodware. A lot of this was because they already had some of the infrastructure already in place, but it's been very successful so far. They collect the bins at the residence hall, so there's bins at every residence hall, 2 bins that people can return them at. There's bins at the dining facilities. They're eco reps, they're student employees. Their job this year is they're responsible for actually taking those bins and wheeling them back to the dining halls for Sodexo to wash. They have to do that once a day. And so far, they've served 25,000 meals this year. So it's definitely been a successful program. So when talking with UVM, what really made their program so successful? One, the financial commitment. When you're looking at these containers, they're a little over $4 a piece. So it's definitely not cheap as an initial investment, and then also finding how to capture it and bring the containers back. Also having that existing program in place really helped them to implement this new program and expand upon what they were doing. But the biggest piece was the communication between departments. So dining, they actually, unlike a lot of universities, they have somebody in Sodexo as part of their agreement with Sodexo. They have a full-time sustainability coordinator. So somebody really has the time to commit to managing this program and tracking it to make sure it's successful. But you also have to engage the Office of Sustainability, who oversees the eco reps, residential life, who will be setting up collection sites in their residence halls, facilities, who is also responsible to make sure they're watching out for these bins, make sure they're not ending up in the trash, and then obviously the provost giving the money to have this program even be started. So I guess the last questions is that really they're looking at is what will the leakage be from this program? So they won't really know to the end of the year, but what they have noticed is at the beginning it was really, really strong, the return rates, but throughout the year they've seen less come in. They've actually had to grab some of the boxes out from storage. So it's, where are the containers? Where are we losing them? Is it in the residence halls? Is it on campus? Where are we missing collection stations that there need to be them, so that we're not losing these? Because again, you lose some of that environmental benefit when you're not getting these containers back, because they do take a little bit more to produce. So, and then how do you increase those return rates? And the last piece, and kind of OZ has that technology piece, so you can track the container usage. So you can report on this container's been used 20 times, this container's been used how many times, and then you can also track maybe who takes them out. So I feel like the big question for reusable containers is how do we get technology to be partnered with them so that we can have that tracking, and maybe even something, I know I've seen a question in the Q&A about do the students bear some of the cost of these containers, and maybe if they check them out and they don't return them, there could be a automatic removal, or you take $20 from their accounts or whatever it is to buy $4 from their accounts to buy another container, just to promote returning the container. So I mean, that again, that's a outstanding question. As far as UVM's program, if you are looking for more information, Sodexo is actually publishing a report in the National Culinary Review around this program, so it should be in the next issue of that. I will definitely share it with everyone that we work with, and they can pass it out, and hopefully Kristen can pass it out to everybody that was on this call today. But I do want to pass along, I know Abby's going to be finishing up here.
Allison. So first, Kristen, did you want to?
Yep. One quick question. And first of all, actually, thanks to the three of you. That was awesome. I really appreciate the opportunity to share success stories with things that are happening right now. It's just the best time for everybody to be hearing some of the positives. Everyone's trying to adapt their programs and figure out what they can do better. And so it's just awesome to hear what's happening on other campuses. Also, just to note, Warren had, he sent the link for the sporks that they're purchasing at Exeter. It's in the chat if anybody was interested in that. And I did have one question for Tiana. Tiana, how are the donations collected on the campus?
That is a good question, and I thought about that after I handed it off to Kelton. So the donations are collected in large shipping containers across campus. So there are several large shipping containers strategically placed around campus so that students don't have to, walk too far with their belongings that they're looking to donate. With that, inside the shipping containers, we place cardboard gaylords, so kind of big cardboard boxes that sit inside, and they're organized by hard goods and soft goods, and they're properly labeled. And then once they're ready for pickup, we deliver them to Goodwill and any other local donation organizations. Like I think for Phillips, Andover, it was Katie's Closet, and there might have been one other, but I can't remember. Does that help?
It definitely does. Thank you so much. And thanks again to the three of you. That was awesome. Go ahead, Abby.
All right. So again, we just want to thank you for joining us for our first Beyond the Bin webinar today. If you really enjoyed what you learned, feel free to check out our multimedia education section of our website where we have more educational materials. That's where we're going to host our webinars. And also we have our podcast episodes there too. We have we're in the midst of, Shabazz and I were the co-hosts for the podcast, and we're in the midst of recording for season 2. And so we've had some really fun conversations so far. We're excited to share those conversations with you. And we're always open for feedback on future topics. So if anyone has any ideas, feel free to just shoot me an email, and we'd be happy to take those into consideration. So yeah, just thank you again, and check out our podcast.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Abby. I will be sending out a follow-up survey to everybody. We really love, as Abby said, to get some feedback on podcast topics, also webinar topics, and any links that we discussed today, we'll be sending that out. We've also recorded this webinar, so we'll post that on our website. We had a lot of people, we've got a lot of people in attendance, but we also had a lot of people with conflicts, so we wanted to make sure we had this to share. So my contact information is here if you have any questions. And just really want to thank our panelists for joining us today. It was awesome. And thank you so much to everybody who attended. Hope you have a great afternoon. Thank you, guys.